Arav Malhotra and Mira Kaur's seemingly perfect life in Canada spiraled into chaos when a shocking lie about a pregnancy turned trust into deception and deception into murder. What began as a desperate scam ended in a Valentine's Day tragedy that no one saw coming. In 2019, Arav Malhotra landed in Canada carrying 2 suitcases and a lifetime of expectations. He came from a middle-class family in India who had borrowed heavily to send him abroad, believing Canada would change their future. Arav enrolled in a small private college in Ontario, choosing a short diploma program that promised quick employment. On the surface, he looked like any other international student, attending classes, working late shifts, and sharing hopeful photos online. Behind those images, his reality was far more fragile. The tuition fees were higher than he had expected, and his part-time income barely covered rent and food. Each month brought new stress, and the pressure from home never stopped. His family expected success, permanent residency, and financial support in return for their sacrifices. Arav began skipping meals to save money and sleeping less as anxiety took over his days. He avoided calls from home, afraid his voice would reveal how close he was to failing. At college, he struggled to keep up with coursework while working long hours at a convenience store. The constant exhaustion affected his grades, and warnings from the college administration started arriving. Losing his student status would mean being forced to return to India in shame. That fear slowly shaped his thinking. Survival became more important than honesty. As winter deepened, loneliness added to the burden. Arav had no close friends and no family nearby. He watched others move forward while his own life felt stuck. Quietly, a dangerous belief formed in his mind. If the system could not protect him, he would find another way. That belief marked the beginning of choices that would later lead to devastating consequences. Arav's life began to change when he met Mira Kaur, another Indian student studying in the same city. She was confident, organized, and far more stable than he was. Mira had arrived in Canada with better financial backing and a clear plan for her future. She worked fewer hours, focused on her studies, and believed hard work would eventually bring success. To Arav, she represented safety in a life filled with uncertainty. Their bond grew quickly. Mira trusted Arav and believed they shared the same struggles as international students. She saw him as sincere and hardworking, unaware of how deep his financial and emotional problems were. Over time, Arav began relying on her support. She helped him manage daily expenses, covered small bills, and even assisted with tuition payments when he fell short. What started as occasional help slowly became routine. As the relationship deepened, Arav felt relief mixed with guilt. Mira's presence reduced his immediate stress, but it also allowed him to avoid facing reality. Instead of fixing his situation, he leaned further into dependence. He presented himself as someone working toward a shared future, carefully hiding his academic warnings and visa risks. Mira believed his promises and invested emotionally and financially, convinced they were building something permanent. Gradually, Arav noticed how much power her trust gave him. He realized that her belief in him could protect him from consequences he feared most. This realization did not arrive suddenly, but it settled quietly in his mind. With every problem Mira solved for him, the balance between honesty and survival shifted. Without fully admitting it to himself, Arav began seeing the relationship not just as love, but as a lifeline he could not afford to lose.
The lie did not begin with a clear plan. It started as a thought that appeared during a moment of panic. Mira had begun asking serious questions about their future, about marriage, stability, and long-term commitment. These questions frightened Arav because he had no real answers. His academic situation was worsening, and his finances were collapsing. He felt cornered by expectations he could no longer meet. To buy time, Arav introduced a shocking claim. He suggested that Mira was pregnant, presenting it as an unexpected situation that required immediate responsibility. The claim shifted the focus away from his failures and placed emotional weight on the relationship. Mira was overwhelmed and confused, but she trusted him enough to believe what he said. Arav used that trust carefully, shaping the story step by step. Soon, he added details to make the lie believable. He produced medical documents that looked official, claiming they came from walk-in clinics. He avoided real appointments, explaining delays with excuses about privacy and stress. Each explanation reduced Mira's doubts just enough to keep her from pushing too hard. The lie grew stronger with repetition. The fake pregnancy changed everything. Mira felt emotionally bound to Ariv, believing a shared responsibility now tied them together. Ariv noticed how quickly the power balance shifted in his favor. He used fear and urgency to stop her from questioning him too deeply. What began as a desperate attempt to delay the truth slowly turned into a calculated deception. With every day that passed, Ariv knew he was trapped inside the lie he had created, yet he continued forward, convinced there was no safe way back. Once the fake pregnancy was established, Ariv pushed the lie beyond the relationship. He shared the story with close friends and distant relatives in India, presenting it as a crisis that required immediate support. The news spread quickly through family networks, where concern turned into sympathy and then into financial help. People believed they were helping two young students prepare for an unexpected child in a foreign country. Money began arriving in small amounts at first. Ariv used emotional messages and selective details to keep the support flowing. He described medical needs, future expenses, and legal worries, carefully avoiding anything that could be verified. The funds helped him clear overdue rent, pay tuition installments, and maintain his lifestyle. Each successful transfer strengthened his confidence. Soon, the scam grew larger than he had planned. More relatives wanted updates. Some asked for proof. Ariv responded by creating additional fake documents and images to support his story. The effort required constant attention, and the fear of being exposed never left his mind. He became restless and irritable, always watching his phone, always preparing the next explanation. Mira remained unaware of the full extent of the deception. She believed the financial help was coming from family support, not manipulation. Ariv carefully controlled what she knew, ensuring she never contacted anyone directly. The web of lies tightened around him. What once felt like a solution now felt like a trap. Ending the scam meant admitting everything, but continuing it demanded deeper dishonesty. Ariv chose the path that protected him in the moment, unaware that every step forward was pushing him closer to an irreversible disaster.
Mira's doubts did not appear suddenly. They formed slowly as small details began to feel wrong. The promised medical visits never happened, and when she asked about reports, Ariv always had a reason to delay. Dates changed, clinics shifted, and explanations became longer but less convincing. Mira noticed that the documents he showed her lacked clear names and official stamps, details she had seen on real paperwork before. She began paying closer attention to Ariv's behavior. He avoided serious conversations and reacted with visible tension whenever she asked direct questions. His phone was always locked, and he became defensive when she tried to understand where money was coming from. The emotional pressure he once used to control the situation started to lose its effect. Quietly, Mira started verifying information on her own. She searched online, compared medical formats, and learned how pregnancy care normally worked in Canada. The more she learned, the clearer the truth became. The timeline did not match, the reports were fake, and nothing supported Ariv's story. What shocked her most was not just the lie, but how carefully it had been maintained. Mira felt betrayed and manipulated. She realized the pregnancy never existed, and that her trust had been used for control and money. Instead of reacting immediately, she chose to stay calm. She documented everything, saved copies of messages, and noted financial details. Mira understood that confronting Ariv emotionally would lead nowhere. The lie had gone too far for simple explanations. As clarity replaced confusion, Mira's fear turned into resolve. She began preparing to protect herself and expose the truth. What Ariv believed was a strong cover was now slowly collapsing, and he had no idea how close Mira was to ending everything he had built on deception. As Mira gathered evidence, the weight of what she had uncovered became heavier each day. She understood that the situation was no longer just personal betrayal, but a serious crime involving fraud and manipulation. The money that had come in under false pretenses, the forged documents, and the emotional pressure all pointed toward legal consequences. Mira began researching her options carefully, learning how such cases were handled in Canada and what steps victims were advised to take. She realized that reporting the scam would expose everything at once. Families in India would learn the truth, authorities would investigate the financial trail, and Ariv's immigration status would come under scrutiny. The future he had desperately tried to protect would collapse instantly. Mira also knew that silence would only make her complicit. The longer she waited, the more damage the lie could cause. Ariv sensed a change in her behavior. She became distant, less responsive, and no longer accepted vague explanations. The control he once held slipped away quickly. Small signs of panic began to show in his actions. He checked his phone constantly, avoided eye contact, and grew increasingly unstable. Deep down, he understood that the truth was closing in. The possibility of exposure consumed him. Losing his visa meant returning home in disgrace, facing debt, shame, and legal trouble. The scam that once felt like survival now looked like a ticking clock. Fear distorted his thinking, and every scenario in his mind ended the same way, with everything taken from him. Mira, meanwhile, prepared to move forward with official complaints and planned to inform those who had been deceived. She believed the worst was nearly over. What she did not realize was that Ariv, driven by desperation and terror, had reached a point where he no longer saw consequences clearly. The situation was no longer just about truth and justice, but about how far someone would go when they believed they had.
Valentine's Day approached with an uneasy silence between them. What was once a day associated with affection now carried a sense of finality. Mira chose the date deliberately, believing it was time to end the situation with clarity and responsibility. She planned to address the fraud, recover what she could, and formally separate herself from Ariv. For her, it was about closure and accountability. Ariv saw the date as a threat. The symbolism of the day only increased the pressure he felt. He convinced himself that this meeting would be the moment everything collapsed. His mind replayed worst-case outcomes repeatedly: arrest, public shame, and permanent loss of his future in Canada. Instead of seeing the meeting as a chance to face consequences, he viewed it as an unavoidable trap. In the days leading up to February 14th, his behavior became erratic. He barely slept and struggled to concentrate at work. The lies he had built no longer felt protective. They felt like walls closing in. Every notification on his phone sent a wave of panic through him. The idea of being exposed terrified him more than the damage he had already caused. Mira finalized her preparations quietly. She organized documents, backed up evidence, and set clear steps in her mind. She expected resistance, denial, and emotional manipulation, but she believed the truth would end the control Ariv held. She did not anticipate danger. There was no history of physical violence, only deception and pressure. As the day arrived, two very different intentions moved toward the same meeting. One side believed the truth would bring resolution. The other believed exposure meant destruction. That difference in perception turned Valentine's Day into a breaking point, where fear and desperation would collide with irreversible consequences.
On the night of February 14th, 2022, the meeting took place in Mira's apartment, a space that had once felt safe to both of them. What began as a discussion quickly became tense as the reality Ariv had been avoiding finally surfaced. Evidence, consequences, and the certainty of exposure hung in the air. Investigators later concluded that Ariv realized there was no way to regain control of the situation. Fear took over his judgment. The pressure he had been carrying for months reached its peak, and his thinking narrowed to a single goal: stopping the truth from coming out. In that moment, logic and restraint disappeared. The confrontation escalated beyond words, driven by panic rather than intent formed in advance. The attack happened quickly. Mira was overpowered and suffered fatal injuries before she could escape or call for help. The violence shocked investigators because it contrasted sharply with Ariv's previously nonviolent behavior. What followed was silence, broken only by the realization of what had just occurred. Ariv fled the apartment in a state of shock. He left behind clear signs of his presence, including personal belongings and digital traces that would later become crucial evidence. Surveillance cameras in the building recorded his exit, and timestamps placed him at the scene during the exact window of the crime. Mira was discovered later that night when she failed to respond to messages from a close friend. Emergency services confirmed her death at the scene. Valentine's Day, a symbol of love and connection, was instantly transformed into a date marked by loss and horror. By the time police began securing the apartment, the fake pregnancy scam was no longer just a story of deception. It had crossed into something far darker. The lies that once protected Ariv had now led to a crime that could never be undone, sealing the fate of everyone involved.
The investigation moved quickly once police connected the crime scene to Ariv's background. Financial records revealed unusual money transfers from multiple sources in India, all tied to the same period as the fake pregnancy claim. Investigators traced these payments and discovered a pattern of deception that went far beyond a personal dispute. What first appeared to be a sudden act of violence was now linked to months of calculated fraud. Digital evidence played a crucial role. Messages, emails, and forged documents were recovered from Ariv's devices and cloud storage. The medical reports were confirmed to be fake, created using publicly available templates. Authorities also found searches related to immigration rules, fraud penalties, and sudden departures from the country. Each piece added clarity to his state of mind before the crime. Surveillance footage placed Ariv at Mira's apartment building on the night of the murder and recorded his hurried exit. Witness accounts confirmed his movements in the hours that followed. Within days, police issued an alert as Ariv attempted to leave the province using public transportation. He was arrested without resistance, carrying identification and items suggesting he had planned to disappear. As details became public, shock spread through both the Indian and international student communities. Mira was remembered as focused and responsible, while Ariv's image collapsed under the weight of evidence. Families who had sent money came forward, realizing they had been misled. Their statement strengthened the case, turning it into both a homicide and a major fraud investigation. Prosecutors described the crime as the final result of fear, control, and sustained dishonesty. The fake pregnancy scam was no longer just a background detail, it was identified as the central force that drove events toward violence. By the end of the investigation, the truth was fully exposed, leaving no doubt about how a web of lies had ended. The court case began with intense media attention, both in Canada and India. Ariv's actions, from the fake pregnancy scam to the murder of Mira, were examined in painstaking detail. Prosecutors presented a clear timeline, months of deception, financial manipulation, and emotional control, culminating in the fatal confrontation on Valentine's Day. The evidence was overwhelming. Digital records, forged documents, and eyewitness accounts painted a picture of a man who had allowed fear and desperation to dictate his choices. During the trial, the emotional weight of the case was evident. Mira's family and friends shared how she had trusted Ariv completely, how she had supported him despite her own challenges, and how her life was taken from her for reasons that could have been avoided. The scale of the deception, combined with the tragic outcome, shocked the court and the public. It became clear that a lie, maintained for months, had escalated beyond anyone's control. Ariv was ultimately sentenced to life imprisonment. The judgment emphasized both the premeditated nature of the fraud and the irreversible consequences of his actions. The court highlighted that the scam, initially a desperate attempt to survive, had spiraled into a violent crime, showing how dishonesty and manipulation can have devastating effects when left unchecked. The story of Ariv and Mira became a cautionary tale, a tragic reminder of how trust can be exploited and how fear can drive people to make irreversible choices. For Mira, it was a life stolen too soon. For Ariv, it was a future destroyed by the very lies he believed would protect him. The case remains one of the most disturbing incidents involving international students in Canada, a chilling example of how deception, when combined with desperation, can end in tragedy.